in 2014, people were talking about accumulating 10 Bitcoin because the price was only $200. Like it wasn't that inconceivable for an average person back then to get 10 Bitcoin. And then in 2018 and 2019, everyone was talking about accumulating 1 Bitcoin, because it was, one Bitcoin was basically the equivalent of accumulating 10 the cycle before. So now we find ourselves, now we're in 2022, and it seems like
All right, welcome back everybody to Altcoin Daily. Today we are joined by the great, the powerful Benjamin Cowen into the cryptoverse on YouTube, a PhD in engineering, a really smart guy, focuses on the charts. Ben, how are you doing today?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me. It was great to see you guys in Miami as well. Meet you guys for the first time.
Great to see you IRL in Miami, Bitcoin Miami. You threw a wonderful party. What are your thoughts on the community of Bitcoin Miami?
It was incredible. And it was my first conference, so I wasn't really sure what to expect, but it was crazy to see just 20,000 people there, all descending on Miami and seeing everyone building and everyone kind of coming together. It was pretty cool.
Totally.
I will say, dude, your community showed up in droves. The Ben Cowen into the cryptoverse community, huge, way more passionate and huge than I ever imagined.
Thank you.
Anyways, let's jump right into it. I want to talk to you about Bitcoin. We'll record a separate video on some of your favorite altcoins. I guess just to start, Ben, it is now April, getting into the summer months of 2022. Bitcoin still between $40,000 and $50,000, I believe. What are your general thoughts on Bitcoin today?
Yeah, so we're sort of seeing, again, if you think about the last year, a whole lot of nothing with respect to Bitcoin. And as you guys know, I like to follow the logarithmic regression charts for Bitcoin, just to kind of get an idea of where it is. And I think the best argument right now for kind of where we are is we're like in no man's land. There's definitely the bullish case. There's also the bearish case. We're sitting at a pretty important level right now on a lot of different charts, where it shows that if we were to experience, something like a March 2020 capitulation, or like a December 2018 capitulation, that would take you down to essentially what would be the best time ever to buy Bitcoin. But as we also know, there's no guarantee that we go there. I mean, you just look at the chart and you go back to 2021, the summer of 2021, and we also sat in no man's land, and then we ultimately went back up sort of to the top of the regression band. So, I look at these charts, like the regression charts, and just sort of figure out what are realistic possibilities. And according to this chart, it says the upper bound on Bitcoin right now is around $134,000. That'd be like best case scenario in the short term. Absolute mania phase could get us to 133K. And then to the downside, if we were to go back to say this undervaluation region, that's sitting somewhere between $20,000 and $25,000. But again, one of the interesting things to consider with these charts is that monotonically increasing functions, right? So the longer we just chill, these lines are just slowly catching up to where we are. Again, the way I think about where the market is right now is I look at charts like this, and this is for the entire asset class, but obviously it really does capture where Bitcoin is. I say we're just tracking, we're basically tracking the fair value of the asset class. Okay, so you can think about, what does the fair value mean? You could argue that it's just whatever the cryptocurrencies are trading at. But if you think about the asset class going through like boom and bust cycles, I think that, this chart pretty clearly shows that right now we're just tracking what the fair value of the asset class is. And it's pretty humdrum time, right? Like the crypto markets are somewhat boring right now compared to what they were last year and in 2020. But that's also not necessarily a bad thing for long-term investors like us, who just want to slowly acquire a position over time and then just wait for the asset class to explode again.
Now, Benjamin, I see in past, all the history of this chart, the Bitcoin price has never rode the fair value line. It's either bounced off it as support or been rejected off it as resistance. Right now, we're right on the line. Would you say
Exactly.
this is
We're right on the line. And actually there's another chart that also shows the exact same thing for just Bitcoin. And this is why I think right now is I think the next, let's say 3 months are really going to help define where Bitcoin is going, for the rest of the year. And the reason I say that is because there's 4 times in history where we've been at this level, 4 times. And you can see, after coming back down. So once here, and we fell below it, right? We fell below the fair value. By the way, the fair value of Bitcoin, according to this chart, is around 36K. Okay, so that's where the fair value is. The fair value in the end of 2024 will be 100K. We go through boom and bust cycles. Well, you'll notice there's 4 times we've been at this level, right? 2011, we fell below. 2013, mid 2013, we held, right? You can kind of see we came down to this level. We ultimately held the fair value band, and then we went on to, to another peak later on. And then in 2014 and 2018, we fell below it. So if you look at where we are, right, it's a very pivotal moment in the asset class. I think we're either going to bounce off of it in the next few months, or we're going to get some type of capitulation below. And I would prefer to see us bounce off of it. As you guys know, I'd like to see the cycle ultimately extend well out into, into next year sometime. But I just want to show kind of where we are today and how it compares to where we've been in the past. And we know, I was watching your channel back in 2018. We saw this basically the floor fall out on Bitcoin at the end of 2018. And so, if something like that were to happen, that basically sets up, an accumulation of a lifetime phase, if you will, right? If something like that were to happen. But right now we're sort of just riding that fair value logarithmic regression band. And as I said, the fair value is currently just north of $36,000.
So you've been saying for a long time, talking about lengthening cycles very early on. So I know you've been thinking for a while that perhaps we'd see another peak in 2023, perhaps the cycle top. Is that what you're still thinking? And at this point in time, I guess, how bullish are you on Bitcoin for the next couple of years? I know you're a Bitcoin holder. What's your thesis?
Yeah, well, so yeah, the lengthening cycle thesis basically just comes from, looking at market cycle ROI, right? And noting that every major peak occurred later on than the previous one. So, if we're going to see it, I don't think it's going to happen in 2022. I think it would be more likely to happen in 2023. I think after just like a mania phase that we had in late 2020, you need a cool down period, right? You need some type of a cool down period. And really the question is it going to look something like this, where the risk on Bitcoin kind of comes to this sort of intermediate phase where we were in 2013, right? Where it's undervalued or it's, maybe I shouldn't say undervalued. It's at a relatively low risk level compared to where we were a year ago. And then we just sort of need to work it out for a while. So basically the idea is we just need time to work it out. Yeah, I mean, I definitely remain macro bullish on Bitcoin. I would still think that there's a really good chance we'll see some type of a peak out in 2023. I think 2022 is still going to be somewhat of a choppy year. Just with everything kind of going on in the world from like a macroeconomic conditions, it's not really the best environment for Bitcoin to rally right now, if we're being kind of honest with ourselves. But so I do lean that 2023 is probably going to be a much better year than 2022. With that said, if we have a capitulation, okay, so like if the bear thesis plays out, which by the way, there is some evidence to support it. It's not, I mean, we've been through the market plenty of times to know that, it can always go a little bit lower before it goes back up. So if we were to get a capitulation though, and we saw something similar play out like 2018, I think that you're kicking the can down the road an extra year. And that would actually, at that point, it would actually be a new cycle, I think. Like, so if Bitcoin does capitulate, like the bears are calling for, back to say $20,000 or something like that, then at that point, I would have to say that is a completely new cycle. And then we need to consider the implications of that.
So let's hear about those two scenarios. Let's say maybe just obviously it's just speculation, dubious speculation, Benjamin. But if we capitulate and form a new cycle, 2024, what do you think the potential peak could be? And if we don't do that, and there's a potential peak in 2023, what are you thinking?
I think the price target is kind of the same maybe a little bit higher if we get a capitulation. So the reason I say that is because if we don't get a capitulation and we just sort of kind of ride the fair value line for a few more months and then ultimately go up, I think the ROI for the cycle will probably be capped somewhere between like a 40x to a 50x. So as measured from market cycle bottom in, at $3,100, you're talking somewhere between like 120K, 150K, maybe we could go up to 200K depending on how long it extends. So I would say that if it happens in 2023, probably 100 to 200K. And if we capitulate, then at that point, we would have to consider a new cycle bottom. So like, let's walk through that scenario. So let's say the bears are right and Bitcoin capitulates, we get one more 50% correction. We already had one, right? So if we get another one and Bitcoin goes back down, to see like 70% down, 80% down from the all-time high, and it's, so let's say $15,000 to $20,000. If that plays out, then we have to look at diminishing returns and say, okay, cycle 3 was a 100x, cycle 4 was, say, like a 20x if that plays out. And so then the next cycle after that, I think we would have to assume, we're going to continue to have diminishing returns. But let's say we get like a 10x or something from the bottom. I mean, if the bottom is 20K, a 10x would get you to 200K, right? If the bottom is, say, 25K, a 10x would get you to 250. So I think really it ultimately depends on if we capitulate, right? If we do, and the next peak doesn't come until, say, 2024/2025, then we probably could go a bit higher than we could if the price, if the peak was already, or say like in 2023. And the reason I say that is because basically the underlying thesis that, I think both of us operate with Bitcoin is that it trends up with time, right? So by 2023, the fair value of the asset class is only, or say of Bitcoin will only be 71K. So if we see some type of a peak, maybe a 2x above that, that's getting pretty heated. But by, say, 2025, the fair value will be 130K. So, a 2x above that is going to get you well over $200,000. So I think if it's 2023, it won't be quite as high. If we get a capitulation, it gives us more pain in the short term, which would be hard for a lot of people to navigate, but it simultaneously sets up basically the best buying opportunities on Bitcoin you would ever get.
Are you like me, Benjamin, and like a lot of people who've been in Bitcoin for a while, where, you talked about, all we need is time, and then eventually it just tends to trend higher if you believe in Bitcoin, if you believe that the world is going to turn towards the undebasable, permissionless, censorship resistant, hard money. If that's the case, there's some people not going to sell a portion of their Bitcoin to like 2030, to like 10 years down the road. And if that's the case, how much Bitcoin do you think the average person could accumulate today, 0.2, 0.5, to be considered wealthy in Bitcoin terms in the future?
It's interesting because that question, like, I feel like the answer to that question kind of changes every cycle. It was like in 2014, people were talking about accumulating 10 Bitcoin because the price was only $200. Like it wasn't that inconceivable for an average person back then to get 10 Bitcoin. And then in 2018 and 2019, everyone was talking about accumulating 1 Bitcoin, because it was, one Bitcoin was basically the equivalent of accumulating 10 the cycle before. So now we find ourselves, now we're in 2022, and it seems like that, like 0.1 Bitcoin is sort of like the new threshold that people are trying to build up to, because 0.1 Bitcoin is a lot of money. I mean, you're talking about over $4,000. So, I think the goals for people to shoot for, I think they change depending on when they got in and how early they were. So longer term, people who've been here longer, obviously they had their goals that they were trying to reach in a prior cycle. Now that we're in this cycle, I think if you can get, I think it's somewhat untenable for a lot of people to get 1 full Bitcoin because it's a lot of money. But, if you can work your way up to a few tenths of a Bitcoin, I think that's going to go a long way, mainly because if you fast forward in your mind down the road a few years, if sort of the fearful price that we're all worried about is, say, $200,000, you know, I mean, half a Bitcoin is 100K, and 100K is a lot of money. So I think the answer to that question obviously changes every cycle. You know, right now it's probably a few tenths of a Bitcoin if you can get there. And next cycle, whenever that is, right? If it's a lengthened cycle and then, you know, it's further out, or if we capitulate sooner and then we have another cycle after that, then you know, it getting to 0.1 Bitcoin would probably be a feat that most people would not be able to accomplish. I mean, especially if Bitcoin's trading for like $200,000, you know, to save up 20 grand, for a new investor to save up 20 grand and putting it in an asset that might be new to them would be very, very hard to do. So the answer obviously changes every cycle, but yeah, I think a few tenths of a Bitcoin is probably what a lot of people are shooting for right now.
Benjamin, if you want to take us off screen share.
1/10 of Bitcoin. That's obviously every cycle that does get much, much bigger. I would love to know for the audience down below, you know, if Bitcoiners are right, what could 1/10 of a Bitcoin be in a decade from now? But Aaron, I'll leave it to you.
Yeah, Benjamin, thank you so much for coming on our YouTube channel today. Links to Benjamin's Twitter and YouTube channel down in the description. I subscribe to him. I encourage our audience to subscribe to him. I'm sure many people do already. Benjamin, final thoughts for the Altcoin Daily audience.
If you are watching my channel normally and you're over here watching these guys, make sure you subscribe to them as well, because they actually cover stuff that a lot of people are actually more interested in than some of the boring stuff that I cover on my channel. Even my wife met them in Miami, and she's more interested in their channel than my channel. So subscribe to them too. They provide a lot of great content, and they actually keep you up to date on what's actually going on in the market, not just diving into the chart. So I think we'll leave it at that.
Your wife was awesome. Thanks for the kind words, Benjamin. See you guys tomorrow.